Hey, what's good, people? Mr. Zensphere back again with another RENOISE tutorial. Today we're going to be looking at how you can use phrases to create complex rhythms, polymeters. I think we'll save polyrhythms for another video. But yeah, just wanted to explore some of the power of phrases in your RENOISE workflow that can really add some spice to rhythmic elements, melodic elements in a really kind of like easy and accessible way. So just for a quick example, the kind of things we'll be looking at this video, here's one example. Just a little rhythmic loop with some different kinds of rhythms going on in the understructure of the rhythm. And then we'll also be looking at some like Steve Reich style rhythmic phasing of melodic elements. Stuff like this. So let's take a look at this rhythm bit first and see what we've got going on here. I've loaded in like some random samples. We got a kick, we got a clap, we got an open hi-hat, we got a closed hi-hat, and then we have a couple kind of random percussion elements. And this is stuff that I just picked more or less at random, was just kind of going for a basic rhythmic structure. But let's listen to this first pattern again. And you can see that we just have the one note event at the top of each pattern. And that's because these notes are triggering phrases. So let's get in and look at this first phrase that we're triggering with the kick drum. And it's very simple. If you've never worked with phrases before, it's F7 or it's this phrases tab within your instrument. Phrases are basically like a nested version of the pattern editor within an instrument. So this can be incredibly powerful for doing all kinds of things. But today we're going to be looking at basically polymeter and complex rhythm creation. So you can see this pattern is very simple. It's just 16 steps long. And I've got C4, so it's triggering basically 4 on the floor. I'm going to go ahead and just solo this so you can hear what's going on and see the pattern. Oh, it actually switches patterns, sorry. We'll go back. You can see the pattern is just triggering every 16 lines, basic 4 on the floor. Okay, very simple. What I've done then is I've turned on the key map mode, and with key map mode you can drag your phrases onto the keyboard and place them wherever you like, and then you can also set a key range, right? So you can have it transpose up the keyboard across a certain range, or if you wanted to constrain it just to one key, you can certainly do that as well. I'm just going to bring this back to where it was. And you can do this with multiple patterns on the keyboard. So this can be a really easy way to access different rhythmic variations. So you can see on this first pattern, we've got 4 on the floor. The second pattern, we've got half time, so triggering once every 2 beats. And then this third pattern, we have 2 beats, and then we have this kind of like tresillo rhythm. It's not quite the tresillo. It would need one here if it was tresillo, but it's got, you know, a different feel to it, and that's what's taking place in this second pattern. So right out of the gate, you can create rhythms in this kind of additive way of just breaking it down to simple building blocks, and then throwing different building blocks into your pattern to create some different kinds of interfaces between the rhythms. So that's all pretty basic. Let's look at what's going on with the snare. Snare is also really basic. So what I did here, it's 2 beats, but it's triggering every other beat, and it's not triggering on the first beat. And that's just so I can put my C4 at the very top of the pattern and have it trigger through. If you wanted, you could just have it start whatever beat you want. There are some advantages to having a C4 note event on the first line of your pattern. For instance, if you want to do like fills or something like that. So let's change this and see how that behaves differently. So we've got this now on the first one. And let's solo this as well. Now our clap is on 1 and 3 instead of on 2 and 4. So we can just move this note event and then we'll preserve that same pattern. Now we got clap on 2 and 4. But say I wanted to throw in some more claps or some ghost notes. So let's say I wanted a ghost note here. So then I could just trigger this pattern again. Make sure I'm on the right octave here. And maybe make it a lower velocity. But now see, it re-triggers our snare pattern on starting from this 1C line. So we need to find our next snare, which should be right here, and put another pattern trigger right there. And then we're back on our every other rhythm. And then our second pattern is following over from the first. So phrases run across patterns, which is really useful and something to be aware of. So, like for instance, in this case, it lines up fine, but sometimes it won't line up fine. So it's often useful to trigger the phrase every time you want it to restart in a pattern, just so it's just so you're sure it's where you want that event to be. Okay, so that's the kick and the snare in this one. Let's look at the, let's see, what's our next instrument here? It's an open hi-hat, and this open hi-hat is just playing on off beats. And again, I didn't have anything on the first pattern line, and that's fine for this rhythm. But again, you might want to consider starting your patterns on the first line, although it can be helpful to have it start wherever you actually want the rhythmic event. So we just have this nice 8th note offbeat hi-hat. Very simple, straightforward, not really doing anything special. So let's look at our 16th hats. The 16th hats are a little more interesting. So this is a different hi-hat, and we've got a couple different patterns here. So this first one is 3 triggers on 16th notes over 5 beats. And this is where using phrases can really create some rhythmic interest in your drum patterns. So now that this is sold, we can look and see what it's doing. And then its second measure, it's going to this other pattern, which is also 5 beats, but it's every other beat, and then it skips obviously because it's 5 beats. So because this doesn't line up with the underlying tactus or underlying rhythmic pulse, we get this shifting rhythm that spreads and propagates across the patterns. So that can be a really useful thing for, actually, I guess in this case, we're triggering a second pattern in the second, or a second phrase in the second pattern. But that can be a really useful thing for just creating some interest, creating something that's not so predictable, but it's an easy way to play around. So you can just change these number of lines per beat. So say we keep our subdivision the same and we make this 0C or 12 beats. And it just is triggering every 16th note. And if we wanted to make a more standard rhythm pattern, we could have this be 16 beats, or 16 lines rather. The 10 is 16, obviously. If you know hex, which you probably do, if you're watching this. But yeah, you can play around with like different lengths of patterns. And obviously you want to keep it to your subdivision, unless you don't. And that's where we get into kind of like polyrhythmic territory, which I'll look at in another video. Okay, you get the idea with that. And then let's see what our next element is here. Let's see, phrases. So this is just triggering every 3/16 notes. And then it has a retrigger when it hits the pattern line again. So as I said, these will wrap around patterns, but when they encounter a phrase trigger in the form of a note event, it will start at the beginning of the phrase unless otherwise specified. And let's bring in this last one and see what this is doing. So we've got 6 beats here. Right, 6 16th notes. If each 4 lines is a 16th note, we've got 6 16th notes, and we're triggering on beats 1 and 4. Or 1 and 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1 and 5. So this is, again, just kind of an easy way to create some rhythmic interest, to create your own top loops. You know, say I, mute these. Let's see, let's unsolo everything. And let's mute these. Oops. So then I could maybe say sample this and save it as a top loop. I can grab all these and just render that out. That is a tool. I forget what it's called, but it's a sweet little tool. And then we've got this top loop that we can then save in a top loop folder and access whenever we want for a little extra rhythmic interest. And maybe I might process this, add some contrast with the batch process tool. You get the idea. It's an easy way to kind of build up a unique and interesting rhythmic library that's kind of like unique to you. So you can make your own top loops. That's kind of fun. And yeah, that's about it for that. As you can see, at the end of this pattern, I've got this little hi-hat roll. And because there's a note event on the first line, I'm able to do this kind of quick roll retrigger, and then velocity messages function just how they normally would. Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. Okay, so that's the idea with that. If you aren't using phrases in RENOISE, you're totally missing out because they're super flexible, super powerful, and you can do a whole lot with them. And this isn't even really getting into probabilistic uses. All right, so let's look at this other example and see what we've got going on. So we have this polymetric melodic phrase that's kind of phasing with itself. This is a technique that Steve Reich really explored to good effect in his music. And what we've got going on here, we'll just go through the sound design just kind of briefly. We've got a couple triangle harmonic waveforms, which I created with this harmonial tool from Mark Black. Again, you should pick this up. It's super useful if you're trying to do any kind of single cycle synthesis in RENOISE. It's actually a really awesome, flexible, powerful tool. It has a variety of like wave shaping distortion options, and you can go all the way up the harmonic spectrum. You can shift phases of harmonics. It's really dope. So I've got a couple different triangle harmonic waveforms, slightly different ratios. One is up an octave, and then we've got a little bit of white noise at a very low level, just to give it a little grit. Sorry, I'm recovering. And then in our modulation section, we've just got a pluck for the amplitude. We've got some random panning with a LFO set to minimum frequency. Pitch, I don't think is doing much. There's a slight detune just for some chorus effect. And then we've got kind of a randomized pluck on the low pass filter. Kind of low resonance, maybe a little bit of drive. So we're getting a little random variation with each pluck of the filter. And that's done by using this random LFO with frequency all the way down and some amplitude before the ADSR. Maybe it works after it. No, but if you do it after it, you can see you lose your bottom. Your bottom doesn't go to 0. So order of operations makes a big difference. And then let's look at the phrases and see what this is doing. So we've got 4 different phrases. And we just have a run of root, major 3rd, major 5th, and then the 7th. And I just took this pattern and duplicated it. You can duplicate patterns by focusing here, and then whichever pattern is selected, if you hit Command D, it'll then duplicate that pattern. Oh shit, I should probably re-record this because I'm hacking up a lung. So I took this initial pattern and I duplicated it a few times. And I just decreased the number of lines. So we have 4 note events, then 3 note events. It's the same 3 note events. And then we have 2 note events, and I raised those up an octave. And then we have 5 note events, so including the octave, and I raised that up an octave as well. These are key mapped and then dragged to white keys. I've got them mapped to C, D, E, and F, respectively. And then I'm just creating 4 note lanes. And you can create a note lane by hitting Command Shift and the right arrow, and that will populate note lanes. Or you can use this little plus sign here. And if you wanted to, you could, create some more information about this. You could say this is 4 notes, and this is 3 notes, yada, yada. And then I've got 5 notes here. And I'm just playing them all together. And so then the sum total, even though these are different note values, because the pattern is written to C, it's triggering C. So when you're writing patterns, the note number, note name is pretty important. If you have transposition enabled in a pattern, then you can use the transposing function and you could spread these out over the keyboard and play in different keys, essentially. Or if you're using the scale locking, you could keep it in one scale. And that's actually super useful because then you can kind of constrain it to a certain class of notes and play variations within that class of notes. So that's something definitely worth exploring, although we won't really do that in this video. So then, essentially, they're all just playing at once. And because of the different rhythms, you get this kind of melodic phasing effect. So that's basically a form of polymeter, although on shorter time scales. And that can create some interesting melodic material. So that's just a couple uses for phrases. We'll explore some more uses for phrases in a future video. I do want to look at polyrhythm, which is different than polymeter. This has all been polymeter. I do want to look at polyrhythm, and yeah, we'll keep exploring phrases in future videos. Hope this was useful for you. Hit me up on Gumroad if you need doofers or anything like that, or need RENOISE lessons. I'm always available for one-on-one tutoring. All right, keep being awesome. Make lots of music. Peace.